everyone. My name is Nicholas Johnston. I'm the publisher of Axios. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is the first ever Axios House here at United Nations General Assembly and Climate Week. Our global tentpole finally comes to New York City, so we're very happy all of you to join us. Very grateful you were able to join us. Also hugely grateful to all of our partners today and this week who make all of this happen, and nothing we do at Axios would be possible without the support of our partners. So huge thanks to Weber Shandwick for making tonight's conversation possible. So I'm very happy to welcome to the stage for a view from the top conversation, my pal, Weber Shandwick North America CEO Jim O'Leary. Jim, welcome to Axios House.
How are you?
It is great to see you again.
Yeah, I was going to say it's been a while, but it actually hasn't really been a while, has it?
When we last talked, now there's no way to say this without sounding obnoxious. When we last talked in Cannes, we dug in on the fate of ESG and its travails. Update us on what's been happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a tough year for ESG and DEI specifically. But before I say that, I do feel like this is a lovely space, but maybe not quite as civilized as the villa you guys had in Cannes. It's been a tough year, certainly narratively in particular from an ESG and DEI perspective. This summer has been a very tough summer for DEI. I think that a lot of things are in play, but maybe the most high profile one, right, is Robbie Starbuck and what he's been doing, what he's been pushing for. His kind of pressure campaign against a number of the world's top companies, and certainly if you take his word for it, he'll indicate that he's been the reason why a number of companies like Ford and Harley and Caterpillar, John Deere, a number of others have either backed off of DEI commitments or even more so walked away from DEI in some instances.
So is DEI dead?
Where
does this go?
You always ask me something dead. No, DEI is certainly not dead. Look, I think clearly there's some narrative headwinds that are facing DEI right now. And I think that, many of our organizations that have been pushing in one direction and the pendulum has been swinging in one direction are now feeling the cross currents of that, right? The pushback against that. But I don't think DEI is dead. I think if you look at the data, it kind of tells two stories, right? So first, from a narrative perspective, certainly there is a reluctance to use language that previously was being used by companies, right? That indicated commitments either around DEI or ESG or things within those spaces, right? And so I think that in 2021, I guess it was, there was some research that was done and indicated that 20%, 1 in every 5 earnings calls mentioned DEI or ESG, which was a lot, right? It was a significant increase from years prior. Since then, there's been a 50% decrease. And so now, I guess it was last year, 1 in 10 earnings calls or something will mention DEI and ESG. And I think this year it's even less. So, there's clearly a deliberate effort to back away from some of that language. But I think fundamentally, what underpins DEI and ESG very much still a priority for world's leading businesses, right? And so, from an ESG perspective, whether it's environmental sustainability or decarbonization or good governance or the role of business in society, and then of course inclusive leadership, all these things are still very much, I think, priorities for world's leading companies. But certainly the use of the language is shifting, and let me give you a piece of data that'll be interesting before you go on to the next one. So there's some data from McKinsey that came out, I think, as recent as last year, and it shows that I can't remember if it's 30 or almost 40%, but the outperformance of companies that do well on inclusive leadership and focus on DEI as being more central to their actual business strategies, they outperform their competition. I think it's 38% or something from a financial perspective, and so that's a big one. And then at Weber Shandwick, you've seen our data because Eleanor, excellent reporters, reported on it. But we polled the employees at the Fortune 500 leading companies, and 2/3 still support DEI, ESG, and less than 10% are against it. So I take heart in all of that.
Well, then how should companies navigate that? If you have sort of this big public noise of people coming after you, and then you have how employees feel a different way, how do you thread that needle?
Right. Well, I mean, so I would say it's arguably harder probably to be a CEO at a publicly traded company right now than maybe it's ever been, certainly in memory. And I think that as a result of that, the top companies are very much focused on a modern CEO agenda that's a lot different than the CEO agenda of decades past. And I think central to the modern CEO agenda is the ability to navigate the complexity at the intersection of business, society, policy, politics, culture, et cetera, right? And there are probably a couple of reasons for that. One, CEOs, and this goes back to the data that we published, I guess it was not that long ago. CEOs are a bit apprehensive or they feel they're nervous in many instances about kind of like weighing in on the role of business in society, et cetera. Much more so than a couple of years ago, right? In addition to that, there's also the fact that the CEO topple rate, the rate at which CEOs are either voluntary or are leaving their jobs, whether they're choosing to or not, that topple rate's the highest it's ever been. Right, so there's like a lot of CEO angst around this, and I think as a result of that, the good news though is that CEOs are now leaning on corporate affairs teams and leaders much more so than maybe in years past as a result of trying to figure out how to navigate all this complexity.
Well, this is something Eleanor has written a lot about sort of like the evolving role of corporate affairs and how much that's more often rolling up directly to the CEO. I mean, I guess you would think is that there's a reason. The reason for that is because of how challenging it is.
Yeah, exactly. This is the reason, or one of the reasons for that. So thank you for making that connection. If I didn't, but Eleanor has written about it. There are more chief corporate affairs officers in the Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 in particular than there has ever been. I think it's like 25%. That number used to be much lower, which is a positive sign. I think the role of corporate affairs is proving to be much more materially important to the success or failure of the modern CEO agenda than it ever has been in the past. And I think there's probably three things that corporate affairs, like top corporate affairs teams are doing that are pretty different than in years past to kind of help navigate all this complexity, help their CEOs navigate this complexity. And those are one, taking much less of like an intuition based approach and much more of like a data driven technology enabled approach. I mean that's kind of like a given, stating the obvious. Second, much less of like the reactive crisis managing, kind of like playing the whack-a-mole version of crisis management. Versus like predictive, proactive, kind of like risk.
A regular
management.
Conversation with the CEO instead of just showing up when there's something's gone horribly.
Putting out the fires as they arise, and then I think fundamentally, and Eleanor's written about this too, but the idea of corporate affairs as like a support function was certainly a thing in the past in many instances, and now much more focused on like either protecting value or creating value even better.
Let's do a little thing out of the news. It's fall. It's back to school time. We've seen some universities take an interesting approach here, saying, you know what, we're out of this business. Penn, Harvard, we're going to be neutral on all these kinds of topics. Do you see that neutrality coming to corporations too?
Right. So you're talking about the fact that like Harvard and Penn and some others have declared publicly that they're no longer going to be weighing in on societal issues or something. Right. Yeah. And so, this is a lot different, I think, from the university perspective than it is for corporation. They're, I believe, using the rationale around like, like academic freedom or like, kind of like they're I think they felt like having a singular perspective on societal issues was actually like kind of counter to the mission of the academic institution. That doesn't, of course, exist on the corporate side. The companies don't have that same kind of obligation. I do think that, sure, if you're asking me, are companies going to probably be weighing in less on societal issues than they did a couple years ago? I think that is, yes, they will do so less. Some because they're a little bit nervous or a lot nervous about doing so in the current environment where there is so much pushback against ESG, DEI, et cetera. Now that there's universities that are also indicating that they're going to, be less vocal about it, I think that those who are on the fence might use that as an excuse or rationale to kind of hold back. But I still think fundamentally, though, stepping back from like the words for a minute and thinking about the actions, I do think that the best companies, and Jamie Dimon said this as recently as like a week ago. Right. There's like research from NYU that supports this, but NYU, I guess it was last year, came out with a report, and you can like look empirically at the evidence and the companies that build the things again that underpin the DEI and ESG movement right into their business. Those companies are like the evidence suggests they're more successful. Like I think 30% according to the NYU study, or a little bit more than that from a financial performance, et cetera. So I feel quite good about that.
So before we get the hook here, let's also end on one fun thing. We are in New York City during UNGA, during Climate Week. The traffic, notoriously horrible. Give us your tips for beating the traffic.
Walking, nice carbon neutral
that's the kind
option.
Of thought leadership.
Yeah, that's what I was going for. And Nick, I know you're probably more of like the armored SUV kind of guy, but like just kidding. When you're not traveling in an armored SUV around Midtown during Climate Week, what are you traveling in? On?
I got here in 7 minutes from Central Park on a bike share. Can't beat it.
Yes. I was wondering why you appeared so disheveled when you walked in. No, I'm just kidding. You were always so polished, and you are tonight. So thank you.
Look for me biking to my hotel when this is over. Jim, thanks for being here again. Great seeing you.
Always
Thanks
a pleasure,
to Shandwick making this possible. Let's get Eleanor back up here to finish it up.
All right.